All right, I think we'll begin, and we're going to talk a little bit about the practical side of things here, where things are happening out there in the field that have to do as a result of a lot of the things you heard last night and again this morning. The title of this session is From Lawns to Landscapes and Beyond, with the idea that we're dealing with a situation where we have an industry that has presented us with a wide range of products, all products designed to change things and change things very quickly. So those people that deal with land management have this wide range of materials where they can make very quick and sometimes very inexpensive changes to systems. But we have the cost to human health and the environment to think about. So we've put together a diverse group of panelists today. They're going to talk to you about alternative strategies. Keep in mind, when we talk about any of these pesticide control products, by definition, they kill, repel, or mitigate a pest. Not one of them grows any type of plant material. Nothing in those products promotes a healthy system. So what we're going to hear about today are alternative strategies that work, different ways of looking at materials. We're going to discuss a little bit about land reclamation. We're going to talk about open space. We're going to talk about maybe alternative ways of looking at materials that have been previously classified as weeds that need to be mandated for eradication. As the moderator, my name is Chip Osborne, board member of Beyond Pesticides. And my specialty is turf grass management, so I deal with those areas of managed turf. So as moderator, I'm going to go just a little bit beyond and do a little introduction, a little bit of sort of what I do, and then turn it over to my colleagues to go into more detail. They're each going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then this will be followed up in a workshop session where you can get concrete strategies, how to walk away from this sort of big picture look at it and take strategies home that will work for you. When I talk to the conventional industry, which I do a lot in my business, I'm put in situations where I deal and don't always speak and preach to the choir. Today, this is the choir. And most of my work is done in an adversarial environment where I'm dealing with the conventional industry. And in summary, I'll tell you a little story about dealing, with that side of it and what we see. But the comment I make is at this point in time, it doesn't even matter whether people all agree about the use of these synthetic products. The fact is that people simply out there are beginning to ask about and request a non-toxic approach. So we have a changing market. There are proven negative issues with pesticide products. We've heard that. We've just spent several hours becoming more aware of that. But the message here is that there are viable alternatives that need to be looked at. So we talk about what is a systems approach to natural turf management. So that's my specialty, managing these types of spaces. We're talking about healthy soils, building healthy soils. We're talking about the exclusive use of natural organic products, talking about revised cultural practices, a more sound and sensible way to begin to look at things like mowing and aeration for the relief of compaction, seeding, overseeding, how we irrigate, how we water our open space turf. We're not only talking about managed turf, we're talking about, as I said, Lani will talk about natural sites, and agriculture fits into this with organic ag. At the basis of all of the talks that you hear, improving soil quality is the #1 goal. So it all begins with the soil. That concept that a handful of soil contains billions of organisms that nature put in place to help us grow things. That concept is largely ignored by the conventional industry, and all of those conventional products bypass that whole concept of healthy soils. They go right from bag, box, or bottle to making an effect on some type of plant material, whether they're synthetic fertility products or whether they're chemical control products. Conventional management treats symptoms. Natural organic management solves problems. Lani will tell you how she solves a problem. She and I uncannily do exactly the same thing in very, very different ways. but the end result and the strategies that we use are identically the same. All of the pictures that you see here are 100% natural organic turf systems. This happens to be a residential piece of property. This is a horse pasture. The horse pasture that has been renovated because there were 2 or 3 university extension attempts at managing this and changing it conventionally, and they all failed. And it wasn't until we came in and began to address soils and the living portion of the soil that we were able to turn this around once and for all. This is a pasture in New Hampshire that was seeded out last fall. It's 100% weed-free. There are no weeds. It was done all naturally, all beginning with the soil, with creating exactly the right soil to sustain this type of a system. And here's that same pasture just a week ago. This is what it looked like underneath the snow in New Hampshire all winter long. This is the living portion of the soil creating this type of a healthy and viable turf system. And this is where it really is for me, and this is where I got into this a number of years ago, because like many of my colleagues, and I've been a horticulturist for 37 years, going back to the early 1970s, I cut my teeth with pesticides. That's what we were taught. I was a commercial greenhouse grower. I was taught to spray all that bad stuff back in the 70s when it was only 25 years old, taking for granted that because it was put in my hands, it was okay to use. And it wasn't until I did my own exploration that found out that these materials that I was, at the very least, not being fully informed, and some of the first research that was done in the late 1970s, early 80s on the potential long-term health effect, and a product that I was using very liberally without much caution, turned up to pop up number 3 on the list as a potential carcinogen, and that's all they looked at back in those days. So I began to move away and transition and ended up to be fully organic, shifting my horticultural specialty to turf grass management. But, after all you've heard this morning with the human health aspects and all that science that's out there, does it make any sense to put poison where our kids play? I guess it does, because it happens all over the country every single day. And when you go play golf, you can go back in your hotel room or at home tonight and watch the Masters. Unbelievable pesticide pressure on that. And it doesn't stay right there on that golf course. It goes far beyond. So there's probably too much grass in the world. No question about that. But there is some that still will always need to be managed. We have been taught by an industry to manage a non-native species as a monoculture. And that has become very easy to do with the influence of chemical pesticides. But the fact is that golf, youth sports, professional sports, parks, lawns are still going to maintain turf grass systems, but we have to learn how to manage these in a natural way without the use of these synthetic products, because not only is it not fair to the pollinators and the environment, but absolutely those low-dose exposures that, that our kids get if they roll around in the backyard with 2,4-D, and we heard what 2,4-D is, we all know, and then they go out at 5 years old and start to play soccer and start to move on and get into these low-dose exposures over many, many years. So the focus of the work that we do is trying to create and establish these healthy systems, and sports fields that are maintained without the use of pesticides does not translate and equate to weed pressures. It's just a matter of knowing how to do it and working within that healthy system. The absence of synthetics and pesticides does not sacrifice quality. Normally, late in the season in New England, sunflowers would all be chewed up, even sunflowers that have been had pesticidal sprays. But when you take these products away, it does not mean that quality is compromised, whether it's a turf grass system or an ornamental system. And I guess this is why a lot of us do it. There's a reason that we have come to the table to begin to address this issue of moving forward without the use of these synthetic products. So with that little bit of an introduction to the managed end of turf grass, and in the workshop following we'll expand on some of these things. I don't want to take any more time. I want to move right into this panel that we have here. Thank you. We are very fortunate to have 4 very different approaches to managing land care, and how we're doing it and how we're looking at it. Our first speaker is going to be Tom Cook. Tom is director of the Slim Buttes Agricultural Development Project. SBAG is a community effort to increase local food production, improve the nutritional quality of food, and promote self-reliance among the Oglala Lakota through organic gardening. Originally from the St. Regis Reservation in New York, Tom graduated from the City University of New York with a BA in anthropology and sociology. Tom visited the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in the early 1970s when he was covering the American Indian Movement standoff at Wounded Knee for the national Indian newspaper Akwesasne Notes. Tom was appointed by Governor Mike Johans to serve on the Nebraska Commission of Indian Affairs. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Tom Cook.
Thank you, Chip. Thank you, Chip, and each one of you. A big, hearty thank you from my heart. I've not been to such a conference before, and I'm kind of overwhelmed with the amount of information and startling disclosures to my mind. For 25 years, I've been the management director of a community-driven effort to make community and home gardens on Pine Ridge Reservation. Pine Ridge is a 5,000 square mile southern tier of the Badlands, and I found my appearance on a panel about lawns to be somewhat disconcerting because there are no lawns on the whole place. And characteristic about this tract of land and the people is that they have been under continuous pressure of dispossession. You name it, it's happened. They owned the richest 5,000 square miles on earth, the Black Hills country, and ended up on the southern tier of the Badlands to live on. The Black Hills was legally stolen. It was taken in the time-honored tradition of theft. And it is a current issue. Obama has said he doesn't want to force the tribes to take the money because the Supreme Court said 30 years ago, there's not a more ripe and rank case of dishonorable dealings to be found in the annals of our history. Well, beyond so much disposition, illustrating the condition is the statistic that Pine Ridge contains the county which since 1980 has been listed as the poorest county in the USA. Of 3,147 counties, Pine Ridge ranked last up until the 2010 census last year. And now we're number 2, so things are getting better. The population is a depressed populace. There's no work. There's just problems and more problems. And what we're building on is the resilience of families and communities that want to grow food despite the conditions and the problems. So this is what we've been doing. And with some successes, we've 5 years ago made 535 gardens, but this past year only 115 because of the changing weather, severe weather events, 7 inches of rain in 2 months last spring, and followed by hailstorms and wind throughout the summer like we've not seen before. The results, the harvests have been discouraging low, discouraging to behold. Everybody has in the springtime this enlightened enthusiasm for getting into the ground and growing something for themselves. But when it turns 100 degrees in July, very hot for extended 6-week periods of time, it saps everybody's enthusiasm, ideas, and their daily pace of life. After 25 years or along the way, we sought to examine our model. We had an organic Western-style model of whatever ideas we could implement. But we noticed the Lakota people are like everybody else. They are very busy. They go to the store for everything. And with EBT and USDA commodities, they have no reason to garden. It's not necessary, and it's not personal to them. Then we always hear, well, the Lakota were a horse culture, hunters, and not agriculturists, so what you're doing is not going to work. But no, the Lakota were a hunter-gathering culture tied into the seasons of the year intimately, and possessing star knowledge to a great and developed extent. There's books written on it. They had an entire literature around the star constellations, the influences. Tim, would you want coffee or water? Coffee. And so we want to restore indigenous wisdom and sustainability into our programming. So that brought us to the recognition of biodynamic, spirit-infused gardening as a model to take up and develop as the most appropriate way to work further in this culturally conscious populace. So we say that the plants are our relatives. We say that the earth is our mother, and all the life on there is our relatives. So we have the correct and proper setting to bring forth this spirit-infused gardening like no other culture has. Every relative has a spirit and influence which can be given to us and through which we may gain better understanding. So in the gardener's work with the plants, we take up this schedule, this map, this understanding of the place we're in the universe. We all know the moon and the constellations behind it have a definite influence and impact upon the land and people and animals, plants. And biodynamics takes this and calculates that each day of the month, of the 28 days, and the influences of the constellations behind it going to the earth are specific and known. And we think that this is the best way of gardening. We have the calendar of the best days to plant fruit crops and the different flower and root, and we've been following the calendar for 3 years and have produced the greatest, healthiest, happiest seedlings ever. My brother here is our greenhouseman, and he has just planted 26 biodynamically planted seedlings of 19 varieties. We're going to distribute those to the gardens we make between now and late May, and go onto radio and through the collaborative efforts. We're hooked up with 8 altogether of organizations and programs, districts that are interested in pursuing gardening as an idea but they don't have that much experience. So we are proceeding in collaboration with them to make trainees, young people, to follow the whole process over a 9-month period, and thereby learned the organics, the biodynamics involved, and enjoy a good harvest. We're hopeful, we're happy to be doing this because of so many problems going on. Then we want to address the base of them, the ground itself, the person's relationship to his backyard. So I'm happy to be here to convey that there is effort in this whole area, in the second poorest county in the country, but there are problems beyond pesticides that have to do with the water itself. The uranium mining company 50 miles upstream from us and the new one trying to start in the Black Hills are being opposed by us. And we're in the fight in the 3rd and 4th year. We're still in it. We're frustrated with the NRC process. They're all for the mining company and spend all their time justifying their actions and degrading our concerns. So I say a hearty thank you to the board, to Chip on behalf of the board, and I thank you for your time and attention.
Our next speaker is going to be Tim Scott. Tim's going to give us a different perspective on things, a different way that we may think out of the box and look at, although for you it's not out of the box, it's absolutely mainstream, on how we're going to look at things and take that different type of perspective. Tim is an acupuncturist, herbalist, and writer with a master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine and undergraduate studies in psychology and general health science. He runs a private practice in Vermont and gives workshops on Chinese herbalism, native medicinal plant cultivation, and the benefits of invasive plants. His most recent book, Invasive Plant Medicine, The Ecological Benefits and Healing Abilities of Invasives, explores how plants originally considered harmful to the environment actually restore Earth's ecosystems and possess powerful healing properties. Tim?
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. It's an honor. And yes, I am here and asked to speak here to offer this different perspective on invasives. And my fellow panelists will offer excellent alternatives to herbicides and very intelligent and practical solutions to restoring these lands where these widespread plants grow. But I am here to say these plants are the solution. And we fail to recognize the ecological importance of where these plants grow and do not see the potential economic and healing benefits of these plants. Now, I'll let you know up front, I'm not an expert on invasive plants, even though I've written a book on the subject. I'm not an ecologist or a conservationist per se. I am a lover of plants. And so, with this, and from my background as an herbalist, I have been using these plants extensively in my practice. I also grow medicinal plants and spend much time trying to restore the woodland gardens, woodland forests in the Northeast by growing endangered medicinal plants like ginseng and golden seal and blue and black cohosh. I also wildcraft many medicine and food for myself and the people who come to see me, and I'm always enchanted and curious about the plants that wherever I go. So with this, I feel I have a unique perspective on these plants, and I do not discriminate between them, seeing them all as potential assets. I learned long ago, as Ralph Waldo Emerson asserts, that a weed is a plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered. Now, as a practicing herbalist with training in Chinese and Western herbal medicine, I recognize these prolific plants deemed invasive as valuable healing remedies that have documented medicinal uses for thousands of years. And I've been using many of these plants already in my practice, and all this really came to a head after making use of one plant in particular extensively in my practice, the Japanese knotweed. This is a plant that grows throughout the whole East Coast and into the Midwest. It's probably creeping into here too. And this has been my mainstay medicine in treating Lyme disease with fascinating results. So after hearing all this negativity about this plant and how much time and money and energy people were spending trying to get rid of this, including applying herbicides, I decided to stand up and say something about this and point out some of these other ideas about these plants. And in doing research for my book, I found much evidence out there supporting these ideas that challenge the mainstream discussion and offer this different perspective on these plants. And what I found, for every bad thing one of these plants may do, there is always a good thing from them as well, whether it's ecological function or their healing abilities. Now, as you likely know, most of these plants now deemed noxious were brought here by people to begin with, and for good reasons. Most all of these plants were intentionally spread for food and fodder, for medicine, for soil enhancement, for erosion control and all their useful purposes. In this region, you have salt cedar. This was a species chosen for its adaptive nature to survive this harsh environment, survive the droughts, the floods, and was purposely planted to help stabilize riverbanks and prevent further erosion. Russian olive is another plant around here, again, with the ability to survive this environment and for its ability to feed livestock and enrich the soil in which it lives. And tree of heaven is another one that was brought to this country from China for medicine and for silk production. Now, with this, there's one big question I have, and that is, what is native? What is really native? Now, this was recently conjured up that the plants that arrived after the first Europeans came here some 500 years ago, from that point on, any other plant that came in was deemed exotic. Now, plants have been moving for hundreds of millions of years across this planet, and as far as I'm concerned, this planet is one whole living organism with plants moving across oceans and being moved by birds and all our animals and people, most importantly. So, who really benefits from this ideology of invasive species? Who benefits? Does the environment really benefit from wide-scale herbicide use? Do these ecosystems really benefit from these removal practices? Sometimes, but most of the time I think not. One study was done on Vancouver Island in British Columbia on a pristine piece of land preserved by the Nature Conservancy. And a study was done there to examine the exotic plant species that had moved in there. And it was theorized that these plants were impinging upon the native grasses on other plants that were growing there. But what was found after beginning to try to remove these plants is that with those removal practices, this endangered land began to give way to a new landscape where shrubs moved in, and it wasn't the pristine grassland anymore. And the scientists began to realize that these plants are more the passengers of this change rather than the cause of the change. Even with salt cedar's a plant that is demonized by its claim that it uses more than twice the amount of water as all of Southern California. Yet, with studies done by the U.S. Geological Survey found that efforts to eradicate this plant does not lead to increased water supplies and are not a successful course of action for revegetation efforts. And the Agricultural Department of Texas A&M concurred that the water, quote, the water salvage estimates showing this significant reduction in system water loss after the salt cedar treatment. So in reality, salt cedar is helping prevent further water loss. And it was more an expression of the land because the salt cedar can reach very deep resources of water. And it was more, once the water levels began to rise, then the salt cedar began to be dispersed and not as prevalent. So, do people really benefit from this mass eradication efforts of these plants? I know I don't benefit necessarily directly. And I don't know how many people truly do benefit in most cases, but I do know who does benefit, and that is herbicide companies benefit. Monsanto benefits greatly from this practice. In fact, they were part of the whole advisory committee to set up this program to go after invasive species in 1999. So, also researchers and in universities do benefit from these programs, but it's more for them to receive the grant money just to sustain their research. But in order to receive the funding, they must tout the use of herbicides. So I'm here to say there are actual benefits of these plants growing where they do. Ecologically speaking, if we look at where these plants, we see these plants growing in disturbed, disrupted ecosystems. They take over those areas. That's the nature of a weed, and the nature to take over those areas that have been opened up by either human construction or agricultural practices. There's also the invisible disruptions that help spread these plants with all the pollution in our waterways and in our soil. And one way to really see how this is you see most of these plants growing widespread along roadsides and ditches, and these must be some of the most polluted lands and waters anywhere. And one plant in particular highlights this benefit, and common reed is its name, Phragmites, tall plant with a feathery flower. Now, Phragmites has been used to clean sewage and wastewater treatment plants for municipalities, industries, and government agencies. It has been found to remove at least 15 heavy metals and 11 common pollutants, including herbicides, from the water and soil in which it grows. So, in fact, this plant, even though it's demonized for growing where it does, it's actually helping rehabilitate these lands. And this is the process called phytoremediation. And finally, the medicinal aspects of these plants, we find them have documented uses for thousands of years. And even various compounds from these plants have been extracted by pharmaceutical companies that reap millions, if not billions of dollars for certain companies. One example is with Japanese knotweed. In 2008, a pharmaceutical company was bought out by GlaxoSmithKline for $720 million, and they wanted to cash in on the profits of this compound called resveratrol. Now, you probably have heard this. Resveratrol, found in red wine, and gives you the good reason to drink plenty of red wine, but actually Japanese knotweed contains more resveratrol than any other plant in the world, and pharmaceutical companies harvest this plant to extract this compound and transform that into bottles that we buy at the store, costing $20 to $30. Now, that's a clump of roots that many people are trying to get rid of this plant. So St. John's wort's another one of those plants demonized, and it actually makes at least $500 million annually for the herbal industry. And then there's dandelion, your everyday herb and basic tea blends. So in addition, there's all their economic benefits of these plants. There's vast resources in their biomass. In fact, kudzu is one plant. It was nicknamed plant that ate the South and is considered an endless supply of biomass, and the roots are nearly a perfect biofuel, while the plant also provides food, fodder, and medicine for all their economic potential. Its roots contain at least 50% starch by weight, which is an ideal composition for ethanol production, and the vines grow at least a foot a day and thus represent a plentiful biomass energy waiting to be harnessed. Even an article in the racing portion of ESPN suggested kudzu is, quote, NASCAR's fuel of the future. Another economic potential with an invasive species is switchgrass, from planted in the Midwest, which is now being harvested for high-quality, energy-efficient, clean-burning biofuel. In fact, switchgrass ethanol can yield 540% more energy than it requires in its production, and burning it releases 94% less greenhouse gas than gasoline. And you contrast this with the use of corn ethanol, and corn releases only 22% less greenhouse gas than gasoline, and is also an inefficient use of this plant, making use of only kernels. So, in conclusion, our main concern today is eliminating the use of herbicides and dealing with these plants, though I challenge all of us to begin to see these plants differently. They have been trying to get our attention for a long time now with their widespread presence. And they are this ecological response to this widespread environmental pollution and disturbance and upheaval of the land caused by human beings to begin with. It's not the plants, people, that are the problem. It's the people. We are the issue here. So they are sending us an important message from where they grow about the status of the environment, and they are asking to be of service with their abundance. Thank you.
Now we're going to hear some really good news from a neighbor just down the road a piece from Boulder. We're so very fortunate to have Rella Abernathy here to tell us how the city of Boulder has been wrestling with this pesticide issue for some time, and, you know, from the policy perspective, how they're beginning to take this all continually to the next level to try to further distance themselves from the use of these products. Rella Abernathy, Ph.D., is the Integrated Pest Management Coordinator for the City of Boulder, Colorado. Boulder was one of the first cities to adopt an IPM policy and neighbor notification ordinance for pesticide applications. Boulder has nearly 100 urban parks and over 47,000 acres of open space land. The city has reduced pesticide use substantially since the adoption of its first IPM policy in 1993, with the goal of reduction and elimination of pesticide use whenever possible. Rella became the IPM coordinator for the City of Boulder in 2009. Her background is in entomology, and she worked as the EPA's pesticide program on sustainable agriculture and pesticide reduction policy. Rella.
And now for something completely different. Okay, as Chip said, I'm the IPM coordinator for Boulder, which, for those of you who are from outside the area, is just northwest of Denver. Boulder is in an incredibly beautiful spot. It's nestled under these beautiful foothills and these big slabs of granite we call the Flatirons, right at the foot of the Rocky Mountains.
Excuse me, Rella. Can we turn off these lights? I think we can see the slides better.
And Boulder's is a nice place to work when you're interested in the issues that we're all interested in, because we get a lot of support from many different places throughout from elected officials to management within the city to our public. So it's an interesting place to be. So my goal here today is to try to give you some kind of idea about what you can learn from Boulder's history and what Boulder's doing that you might be able to use in your own communities and as you're trying to get pesticides reduced where you live. And so it's going to be a lot from the perspective of a city employee who's running a program. So this is going to be, I've been in the shoes of an activist, and so I'm showing you what you can do to be effective in your role. So here are the types of properties in Boulder where we have landscape type properties where we have pest management. As Chip said, we have a large number of urban parks, about 600 acres of those, and about 100 locations that we consider urban parks. That can be large parks to small little neighborhood parks. And in the urban park system, we have some natural areas associated with those parks. So that could be natural areas within a smaller park or large areas, acreage of land outside the park. That's about 1,000 acres there. And the program that they have going there's managers who manage that property. They do 3 years of mechanical control for each weed. And on the 4th year, if they're still having an issue, they do use pesticides. Especially for these A-listed species. We have a state mandate where that is required by law to eradicate a certain list of weeds. But in 1,000 acres, they used 64 ounces last year. So they're really trying hard to get it as low as possible and eliminate it if they possibly can. We also have street medians that require a lot of maintenance, greenways and bike paths, which are completely pesticide-free. Creek corridors, we have 47,000 acres of open space and mountain parks, which I'll talk about in a bit. And of that, we have agricultural lands that are part of that system. And we also have a golf course. Boulder's about 100,000 people, so that gives you an idea of the population. So I want to talk about how the first IPM began, policy began in Boulder, and the first steps towards pesticide reduction. Back in the 60s, Boulder started acquiring land. And this happened, at this point, it was just an open space department. And their main focus was acquiring land. So they were like open space real estate. That's what they did. They didn't give a lot of thought about how they were going to manage these lands. Most of them are agricultural lands. And they were bought and then leased back to the previous owner. We also have a lot of acreage up in the mountains. And so we had mountain parks at the same time. And mountain parks is more interested in management of the land, protection of the environment, and protection of endangered species and preservation of the properties. And they had a lot of rangers who were involved in that. So a lot of IPM policies come into effect because of public pressure. But in Boulder, an employee who was hired by Open Space in the 90s, the early 90s, looked around and wasn't happy with some of the things she saw and some of the conventional management happening, and particularly some of the management that was happening in the county lands. They have a lot of open space land too, and we affect each other since our lands are adjacent. And so she did all the work to start looking at alternatives, researched it, started implementing it, hired the first IPM coordinator for open space, and it blossomed to the point of a policy. And when this policy took place, it took place for all city departments. So at that point, parks were still managed conventionally. And so this is a wording out of the 1993 policy right towards the beginning. And the important thing is that it says the overall goal of reducing and, where possible, eliminating the dependence on chemical pest control strategies. And since that time, it's gone from mainly conventional management to pesticide being used less and less over the years. We have a lot of trails, miles and miles and miles of trails in open space. They go up into the mountains, and they come down into the prairies. So we have a lot of prairie land, a lot of agricultural land. Open space has a very strong management philosophy about taking care of the animals, and the plants that they feel that they have the responsibility to keep their habitat safe. And they feel the same way about wetlands, about meadows, and preservation of endangered species, rare plants. And there's a lot of work back towards restoration of as close as you can get to, to the closer environment to how these grasslands were a few hundred years ago. Now, the types of problems we encounter as far as management, we have millions and millions of visitors a year. People come from the entire metro Denver area. They come from, outside the state to use our trails and enjoy the beauty of Boulder. And we also have invasive weeds. Like Tim said, most of these were brought in. They were brought in as ornamentals that escaped from people's yards. They were brought in to mitigate erosion. But like I said, we have a mandate where these are required to be controlled. For the largest amount of pesticide that's still being used is on agricultural properties in Boulder. We have agricultural managers who work with the lessees on IPM programs to try to reduce chemical use, and we have some room to work on that. But recently, they've done a survey of all the properties, all the agricultural properties, and have tried to find those candidates for organic agriculture. And as those leases expire, then they can add that into the lease. And as they acquire new agricultural properties, then they can require that the lessees on the properties that would be good organic farm candidates, especially for vegetables, are transitioned into that. And we're starting our first purchase this year that's going to be an organic farm. We also have a lot of grasslands where forage is grown that are chemical-free, and those cattle that are raised there can be sold as free-range, pesticide-free. And they have a lot of acreage to manage. There are 2 IPM coordinators just for open space who try to mostly deal with weed problems. They do some restoration projects too, but weeds are their main issue. And here you see one of the IPM coordinators, Ewe4ic, is mechanically controlling Mediterranean sage. And along with an army of AmeriCorps volunteers, they walk thousands of acres hand-controlling Mediterranean sage. Mediterranean sage is an A-listed weed that's required for eradication in Colorado. And they're perfectly, and even under our policy, they can use chemical control if they wish. But since Eric has been the IPM coordinator and been responsible for this area, he's been able to maintain it by mechanical control alone. There's a lot of other things in open space. If anyone wants to talk to me during the workshop, I can give you some other examples. But I'll move on to urban parks now. Our urban parks program is fairly advanced. We have some room to go, but we're getting there. They haven't used herbicides on turf now for about 10 years. Now, that kind of happened cold turkey due to public pressure. So this it couldn't have happened at a worse time as far as trying to maintain their properties because we had a drought around the same time. So we had a lot of weeds invade. And one of the things we did was bring Chip in as a consultant along with CU, University of Colorado's, the main campus is located in Boulder. And we were doing some collaborative work together. So we brought Chip in to do training for both the city and the university staff. And what we're looking at doing is improving the quality of our parks turf by increasing some of the cultural controls we do. Our staff already does top dressing, aerating, some of the things that we haven't been doing as much. We've been using mostly synthetic fertilizers, so we're looking at trying to transition over to using natural fertilizers. So our staff has been following for a long time cultural techniques of mowing, the proper height, and trying to get it's really important that get our irrigation systems working properly, not only to conserve water, but to grow better grass. And they're constantly experimenting with different grass seeds because they know that it's important that you have the right plant in the right location. We have several pesticide-free areas that have been pesticide-free for many years. One is the Pearl Street Mall, where we took one of the main downtown streets and bricked it up. So it's a beautiful area. The trees and all the plants are maintained without pesticides. And our municipal complex has been chemical-free for about 10 years. This is where City Hall is located, several city buildings. There are a couple of parks there, a band shell, and there's a creek that runs through it. And along that creek corridor within city limits, pesticides aren't allowed to be used within 50 feet. We have extensive bikeways, greenways and bike trails, and those have all been managed just solely mechanically for at least 5 or 6 years now. And one of the things that we're doing now is we're starting a pilot program for completely cosmetic pesticide-free parks. So we'll be instituting that this year. And we're trying to have them in each section of the city, so every family, if they want to take their kids to a completely pesticide-free park, they can. So these properties will be working with Chip's guidance to try to get these turfs in better shape. We chose some of our fairly good properties that are new properties, so they have good turf. But we also have some properties that are pretty sad. So we'll be experimenting to see if we can bring those back. We have volunteers and staff that do mechanical control, and we use propane torches as well. Now here are the things that I feel have been the keys to Boulder's success. The whole city has a culture of progressive thinking, and so you don't have to try to get people to that point when you start. It's been that way for a long time, and we have an incredibly well-educated public, and we have a great activist community. So when they don't like something that we're doing, they let us know, and because of that, that is the reason why all the changes have taken place since '93. When we had we had an environmental audit that created some major changes. We had most pesticides banned. We've had a lot change, and that pressure is continuing to propel us forward. So I want to make it clear that it's important to make sure that you have your activist community present. We also have incredibly well-trained staff, and you need to know your city. Know what tools are available to your staff. Our staff, a lot of them, especially the open space staff, you ask them if they've done something, and they tested it already. So they're always looking and trying new things. Same thing with our park staff. Our community is also very involved. If we have a public meeting or we ask for public comment, they show up. If they don't like something they do, they flood our city council with letters and emails and call us. And the people in Boulder really love nature, so they care. They don't want our wildlife to be impacted by pesticides. We also have a healthy community, so they understand the dangers of pesticides. A lot of people eat organically in Boulder. Our biggest challenges are cost. Just for the streets, the medians, we spent $100,000 on mechanical control last year. And we spent many hundreds of thousands of dollars on the cultural practices and the mechanical control on our other properties. So we invest a lot of money. And in these in any time, that's difficult to get a city to want to invest in these types of programs. But in these tough economic times, it's even harder. And as I said, we have a tremendous amount of property, which makes it a challenge to try to take good care of all of it. And I mentioned the state mandate we have for weeds, which is a problem. And another issue we have, we still use some pesticides on city property. The vast majority of pesticides used on private property. So we've been working together with the University of Colorado, and Louise Chall is here, and she will be at the workshop to talk a little bit about this joint effort we're making to try to educate the public about not using pesticides on their own properties. So here's my advice to you for working with local government. First is to really understand the local pest problems and what it takes to get those controlled, and understand the budget constraints that you're working with. A lot of non-chemical techniques are very expensive. So, like I talked about how much mechanical control costs, and transitioning to organic turf care is expensive at first. So it requires an investment. It saves money in the long term, but at the beginning, at the outset, you have to have your public and your elected officials willing to spend the money. If you say you're going to volunteer and pull weeds, follow through. One of the things that's happening in Portland is when they were working with NCAP to do their organic pilot program on their parks, people stopped showing up. And when people stop showing up, they have the other rest of the public complaining about weeds. And so show up. And it also takes a lot of staff time to organize volunteers. So if you're a nonprofit or if you have the ability to help organize volunteers, that would really help. Educate yourself and others about pesticide health effects so that you can make sure that your elected officials know about that. And be patient because it takes time. And I know that when you know that these poisons are out in the environment, it's hard to be patient. But if you go in with a lot of demands, they can't change everything at once. And support progress. When staff goes to all the work to try to change things, support that. And because people become disheartened that they feel like nobody cares the work that they're doing. and persist. Don't give up. Keep trying. So we always remember the long-term success and that you take a lot of little steps as you reach your goal. So thank you.
Thank you, Rella. What a great story about how a community, not a small community either, a community of size has wrestled with this issue. It gives me distinct pleasure to introduce to you one of my fellow board members of Beyond Pesticides, Lani Malmberg. Lani grew up in a cattle ranching family. While in graduate school studying weed science, Lani got the idea to offer goat grazing service for those who did not want to spray chemicals for weed management. She has grown her business, Ewe4ic Ecological Services, to 2,100 cashmere goats, working for governments and private landowners for noxious weed control, fire reduction, reseeding, watershed management, and land restoration. The company also offers noxious weed mapping and inventory. Lani owns no land and considers herself a gypsy goat herder, working in 10 western states. Lani.
Does everybody want to stand up for 2 seconds? Well, I grew up on a ranch in western Nebraska, the Sand Hills of Nebraska, right next to the Sioux Indian Reservation, right south of Pine Ridge, South Dakota. Right next.
Is it on? Right next to Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And I was a senior in high school when the tragedy of the Wounded Knee thing happened and the American Indian movement came into town, and I met Tom. And he's very modest. But I was told that Tom was an Indian and he had the best memory of everybody in the world. He was a smart man and he had the best memory of anyone in the world. So I was a senior in high school and I walked up to him and I said, "Morning, Tom, what'd I have for breakfast?" He said, "Eggs," which was true. So anyway, I haven't seen Tom for 35 years. And he gets here last night, and I'm here last night, and I thought I'd be real clever, and I walked up to Tom and I said, "How?" And he said, "Scrambled." Anyway, I'm a gypsy goat herder. Everything I own has either 4 wheels or 4 legs. And all of my tools are edible. Now, last night, Jay gave a great speech, and he said that Beyond Pesticides is 30 years old. And 30 years ago, there are things now that you would not have seen 30 years ago. One is the word sustainability, and people who understand that we have to live in a sustainable way. Another thing is a thriving organic community, organic food. You can find organic food to buy in grocery stores. And another thing is pest companies that offer alternative measures to get your pests. Now, I want to add to that another thing that is in this room right now that wasn't here 30 years ago are professional goat herders. Could I please have anyone in here stand up who's a professional goat herder? Woo! That's Mr. Benz. Mr. Benz has a degree in business management from Colorado State University, and he's a professional grazier. And I am too. So there are 2 of us, which is what, about 1.5% of this room. Now, could I have those of you stand up who want to start a professional goat grazing service? And that's, look, here we got 3, 4 people in this room. Ryan's from Steamboat Springs, and this young man has a degree from Colorado State University in range ecology. So you wouldn't have seen those things 30 years ago. And another thing you wouldn't have seen 30 years ago is cowgirls and Indians sitting at the same panel. Anyway, so I've been working Well, we're on 15 years now, and we do weed management, brush control, fire fuel load reduction, erosion mitigation, flood control, reclamation, and reseeding. We work and have worked for the federal government, state governments, counties, cities. I've worked in the city of Boulder, County Boulder Open Space. I just trucked up one semi-load from Texas, and they're in Broomfield, for city of Broomfield right now. Private work, Char's here with Organic Gardens in Colorado Springs, and we have worked with them for 11 years in a row. This will be our 12th year if we can get our budget. They can get their budget. Corporations, giant corporations, Chevron Oil is one of my main contracts now. Homeowners, groups of people, private things. And I like to use 500 or 1,000, 1,500 or 2,000 head of goats. 2,000 goats means 8,000 hooves. And it's the hoof action and the urine and the manure. That's how I build the land. Now, I do some things. I work in downtown Denver, and I work for XL Energy, and we get an orange flag and a good dog and run down the street. So we had a policeman came and flagged us through this stoplight here. And you can hardly see Zippy there. All you need is an orange flag and a good dog. I went into that XL power plant, and they had their big sign says Energy Supply Performance Goals. I took a piece of black tape and crossed that L and made a T out of it. And never told anybody I did it. I still don't know if anybody knows. Now, goats are amazing creatures. They eat things that nothing else can eat. I believe Colorado has 68 plants or weeds listed on their noxious weed list. 68, I think. Well, I think Colorado has 68. Wyoming has 23. Colorado has 68. And goats eat and like every single one of them. And they prefer them to grass. They're self-propelled. They're the only grazing animal or only piece of machinery that can stand on their hind legs and reach up into the trees. I haven't had anything yet that poisons them. They eat all kinds of poisonous plants. And when I bring goats in to do a job, this is all about diversity. And the diversity is in the ecological part, the financial, the cultural and social, and animal behavior. And this is all positive changes in diversity. But it all begins in the soil. Here's 1,000 head of goats, and Mr. Donnie Benz in the back here, and his professional dog Zippy. And this is on a U.S. Air Force base, and he's running 1,000 head of goats across the bridge, jumped the guardrail, and down into where they were supposed to go. And that piece right there had 2 poisonous plants, wild iris and death camas, and Colorado butterfly plant, an endangered species. So we graze that, managing time and knowing the plants and staying there long enough to get the job done and getting off when it's time to get off before we do any damage and knowing which season to be there. Now the base people did plant surveys and said that the next year after we came through with the goats that the Colorado butterfly plant had increased by 150%. Welcome, we're running Zippy for mayor. Now, I thought it was really simple. Oh, yeah. Yes, they eat death camas with no ill effect. Goats eat poison hemlock. They have an enzyme in their saliva that detoxifies it before they even swallow. So, me, being an animal person and an old cattle rancher, this is natural. Goats are browsers. Cattle are grazers. Like Chip said, we have too much grass. If you have too much grass, get some horses and cows because they're going to eat it all by first choice. If you have too much trees and brush, get goats because they're going to eat all that and then you're going to have all grass. And if you have a perfectly balanced system, put sheep in there because they'll keep it balanced. If you have an apple orchard, use sheep because goats are going to eat your trees. And to me, this is really simple. And I just applied my knowledge of animals and how to manage them and my scientific education I got at Colorado State and started a business. So land restoration, now this is a big paradigm shift from what we're used to. Instead of going out and trying to kill these target weeds, I'm going to add what's missing. What's missing here? So what we're going to add is new ideas, new energy, new life, creativity, excitement, And look at these young, educated people in this room that are goat herders now. I think it's wonderful. So we're going to feed the system. We're not going to kill anything. We're going to feed the system. We're going to change the energy, whatever is in those plants. We're going to transform it to a bunch of usable minerals and put them right back there in the soil so the next suite of plants can come. We're just recycling these natural resources. They're there. We're just changing the form of energy, but we're putting it in the soil where it can work. We're recycling a weed problem. Well, we're recycling it to cash. Solar energy is free, and I am recycling my knowledge of being a rancher. We are nurturing the system. We're not killing anything. So here's the system. Now, I do a lot of work in Wyoming with not much rainfall, very little organic matter in the soil, and high pH, tough conditions. So we got about 3 sprigs of grass there and some baby kochia. Now, typically, the way would be to come out here with a big herbicide and kill the weeds. Well, why would you want to do that? This land can't absorb any rainfall. And then what do you have? 3 sprigs of grass. Whoops, sorry, wrong way. So here's how they usually do it. Got to have big machinery and a lot of it. This is how we do it. Our goats are self-propelled. They're doing 7 things at the same time. It's one-stop shopping. It's a goat's natural preference to eat all these weeds before grass. Grass is their last choice. They're fertilizing. Everything they eat's recycled. Comes out as natural organic fertilizer. And to organic gardeners, that's pure gold, right, Shar? They irrigate. If you get 1,000 head of goats a drink of water and then run them over here, they drop that water a pint at a time, and it's got a little nitrogen in it. They trample the seed. They prepare the seed bed, trample the seed bed, mulch it, till it, aerate, and condition the soil with their hooves. A goat's a split-hoofed animal. When they're walking, it hits the ground flat. If you take these good dogs and kick them into a run, their hooves are going like this. If you run them and turn them, they're digging like this. 1,000 goats is 4,000 hooves. This is how we do it. We run cashmere goats. They have babies on the job. The cashmere is shed off once a year, and that's a very valuable byproduct. And the poop is pure organic gold that goes into the soil. Now, this is sagebrush she's laying there in. And sagebrush is a natural wormer to goats. I've never wormed these goats with any chemicals. I only use all the plants. I don't supplement anything except salt, and try to get them their natural health with a diversity of diet. Soils. I always take soils tests, and it's fascinating where I work. In Wyoming, in my work, we spend 364 days a year getting ready for the rain. Soil's the secret. My friend Pee-wee's a Shoshone medicine man, and I asked him about the rain dance, and he said, timing is everything. But in the soil, 1% soil organic matter holds 16,500 gallons of water, which is equal to a 10-inch rainfall. It's not how much that you get, it's how much that soil can hold. So this organic matter, in one of my jobs here, under organic matter, you can see where we had the goats was 2.04, and no goats 1.8, and a year after the goats 2.25 of soil organic matter. We're building organic matter in the soil. I did a job for Chevron Oil at Table Rock, an oil field reclamation, and they had halogeton, which is a poisonous weed, kills sheep. 2 bites will kill a sheep. It's a Echinopodiaceae. So those guys came out and sprayed it, and they had their dye in there. Well, I went in and I took soil samples. I take them on my work, but I went in there and I took soil samples where they sprayed to kill the halogeton. See their mentality? We want to kill the halogeton. No further thought of what do you want there? What do you want in the future? It's just, well, go kill it. So anyway, they killed it, and they got bare ground, and then they got some more halogeton. But all the bare ground there. So I took soil samples, and I took it where they sprayed and then up on the hill. And I always say, if you want a good grassland, a healthy grassland, you've got to have fungi, bacteria, and a 1-to-1 ratio. You have to keep those ratios up on everything you do. So look at total fungi, where they sprayed. 176, railroad crossing, no spray, 2 orders of magnitude, 12,000. And there, I was so happy when I saw this in my soils test. And here are the goats eating tumbleweeds. Year 1, eating nothing but tumbleweeds in Rock Springs, Wyoming in the middle of September of 2009. This is the next year, grass. And blue flax, we planted that flower there. This is west of Casper for Chevron, year 1, tumbleweeds and bare ground, Russian thistle. Here it is looking off the top of the tower. We seeded grass as we went there. I mean a mixture. We had grasses and some sage and 4-winged saltbush. There they are eating it year 1. Close up of them eating it. Before and after, one side to the other. After that first year we grazed that. Beginning of year 2, July. Grasses, we seeded those. And you can see my transect over there. Goats eating it. See the lamb's quarters coming in there? So I'm starting to see another species. It's still Echinopodiaceae, but it's coming up in hierarchy. After I grazed it in year 2, beginning of year 3 as the snow just melted, you can see the grasses coming there. And in year 3, when we went back to graze it, that's what it looked like. That's western wheatgrass and Indian rice grass, 2 feet tall from the top of the tank and 2 feet tall. And I told Chevron to send their combines. Oil field in Rock Springs. It's really tough when you're working in this tough country. This is 7 inches of rainfall a year. And I try to concentrate these goats at the rate of 1 million pounds per acre to get the impact on the land. But when you're setting electric fence like that, it's really hard because you can't fill them up. And that was the next year, 10 months later. We feed the system, we feed the soil, and hold the water with organic matter. Sage grouse were going to be listed as endangered species. I say what's good for the baby sage grouse, baby sage grouse. There were no babies here. We saw the adults, but no babies. But what's good for those babies, I say, is good for the other babies in the community, is also good for my kids, and I call them eco-heroes. Thank you.